right, it's live now. Asiba, take it away from here. He lose people. Where be the edge?
Asif bhai koi?
Someone message him.
Who?
Asif bhai koi?
Asif bhai is in the chat.
Take body lotion. Talk to me, baby. Wait, shit.
Bros, আসলে শুরু করা উচিত. Where is he?
তুই অ্যাড ছাড়া লাইভ কেন গেছস?
তুই জাজ কর তাহলে জায়েদ, শুরু করা উচিত, তুমি জাজ করো, এত কথা বলতেছো কেন?
Zayed is in the dinner table. আমাকে বললো।
Who is that? I can't join the phone call. It okay.
হ্যাঁ?
Now okay.
এই নাওয়েদ
নাওয়েদ ভাইকে আমি দেখি নাই কিন্তু।
হ্যাঁ আমি ওটাই বলছি। নাওয়েদের কিন্তু ওর মানে ইয়ে দেখাচ্ছে। He's not even muted. Nawed, are you there?
No, we can hear Nawed. He's asking if you can hear him. No, শোনা যাচ্ছে না।
New?
He left.
Oh, he just went away.
No, he's gonna join back.
ইস লাইভ বলে একটা সৌরদীপ রিলেশনশিপ যোগ মারতে পারতাম।
Not helping Adi, not helping at all.
Nah, bhai, maren, because it's live and people are gonna get bored. So like, maren.
Entertainment.
Start করার আগে আমরা কেন লাইভ গেছি?
আপনি আরিয়ানা গ্র্যান্ডের গান শুনেন। I have no respect for you whatsoever. Adi bhai, please.
What's wrong with Ariana Grande again?
What's right with her?
I don't know her right hand.
এটা যে আমার কি ভাল লাগছে মানে
Those no wonder.
Acha, Asif bhaiya can't join the call.
Why not?
I don't know.
I think he has to leave the call and then join again.
Is he in the call?
Like,
yeah, he's in the call.
He's in the call, exactly.
জিনিসটা অনেক
confusing. একটু কল দাও।
হ্যাঁ, দুইটা আসিফ আছে, জিনিসটা একটু কনফিউজিং।
Click the link.
Oh.
Join again. Let me eject him.
Also, Nawed bhaiকে কল দাও।
আচ্ছা, Nawed থেকে তারপরে we can call him.
আচ্ছা,
Nawed কি
স্টুডেন্ট জব কল বলতেছে, ভাইকে কল দাও যাচ্ছে না।
Let's like kick them out of the group. তারপরে আমরা আবার অ্যাড করি।
লিংক ক্লিক করলে হচ্ছে না। আচ্ছা, I face that too. আমি লিংক ক্লিক করে পাচ্ছিলাম না কেন জানি।
How do you add people, by the way?
ওই ইয়াতে যাও।
ও গাইস, join using link অপশনটা বন্ধ করে রাখছো। হবে কেমনে?
কে বন্ধ করছে? Oh my god.
It's off. আমি
পাচ্ছিলাম না, আমি এটা জানি। জায়েদ called me, ওইজন্য আমি আসতে পারছি।
But how do you add people?
Add option আছে একটা, দেখো। দাঁড়াও, wait, let me. Now.
Yes, I added him.
আচ্ছা, he's not on my so আমি জানি না কেমনে অ্যাড করব ওকে।
He's on my contacts, but how do I add?
আসিফ ভাইকে অ্যাড করো।
তুমি জানো সেটিংস ওখানে পিপলে ক্লিক করো, পিপলে ক্লিক করলে দেখো পিপল ইন দিস কনভারসেশন অ্যাড পিপল আছে, মেসেঞ্জার গ্রুপ চ্যাটের মতোই।
Settings এ তো integrated webcam default
সেটিংস এ না, ওইখানে দেখো পিপল আছে সেটিংস এর উপরে।
না পিপল নেই।
পিপল অপশনস অ্যাড টু হোম স্ক্রিন, ওই পিপলে ক্লিক করো।
নাই কিন্তু just saying there's no
আরে
option
কি
like that. I'm not
Nahi,
using
nahi.
the app, by the way. I'm using my laptop.
আমিও।
আচ্ছা আমি ফোনে।
Yeah, so use those options.
আচ্ছা
আচ্ছা আসিফ হাসানে কাইন্ড ফেরত আসছে, হি ইজ কামিং ব্যাক।
asif@technofame.com ওকে ডান, পাঠাচ্ছি।
কি কমেডি আল্লাহ।
আচ্ছা নায়েদ ভাই মেল আইডিটা আমাকে দাও, আমি ওকে আমার কন্টাক্টস অ্যাড করে দিচ্ছি ইফ ইটস লাইক।
আমি গান ছাড়ি।
Nafees8@gmail.com.
ও এইটা আছে।
এইটা কেন জিজ্ঞেস করো না?
Adi. Ekta kya no?
ये
Ekta kya no?
डोंट ask।
হয়ে গেছে। ওয়েট
ভালো কথা বলছো আপনার।
ও নায়েদ ভাই ইজ অ্যাড করা হয়ে গেছে, ইজ হি হিয়ার?
নোপ।
দুইটা নায়েদ নাফিস কেন? আমার এখানে
What?
দুইটা নায়েদ নাফিস দেখাচ্ছে। আই এম নট কিডিং, আমি স্ক্রিনশট দিচ্ছি, লাইক আই ক্যান সি।
Dita Nawed Nafees.
Another Nawed Nafees is texting me back, he has to add me to the call. What the fuck is happening? Wait.
Hey, we're live.
There are two people watching.
No,
Guys,
he's
don't
texting
worry.
রোজ আজকে মনে হয় তর্কটা হচ্ছে না।
Adi.
Nawed bhaiya, are you here?
Javed Jafiz.
Who is this unknown person?
Who?
That
I don't
is
see
an unknown
anyone.
person.
Oh, there you go. That's Nawed, right?
I don't see.
Guys, can you hear me now?
there.
I see দুইটা।
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, thank God.
Asif.
Yeah.
I just so everyone hear me, right?
Hi.
Oh
Who
my
just
god.
dropped off?
Are multiple Nawed. Oh yes.
Oh my god, Nawed bhai, are you here? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, thank God.
I have a feeling Asif Hassan bhai is not here.
Oh shit.
But it's just a feeling.
Guys, it's been a 1 hour prep time. Beautiful.
Not that video was prepped.
And no one has prepped yet.
আমরা এখন স্ট্যান্ডার্ড প্রেপ টাইম রিচ করে ফেলছি ফর বাংলাদেশ বিপি টুর্নামেন্ট।
না রিসার্চ ভাই জাস্ট আর 5 মিনিট।
Add করে এখনো ডিসাইড করতেছে।
চলো 5 মিনিট।
আমি ওয়ার্ড স্মার্ট একটা ওয়ার্ড শিখছি আরবিট্রেশন।
এতদিনে
Asif bhai kya?
Where's the other? Yes.
No, Asif Hassan is not in the call.
Oh no.
I saw that.
আচ্ছা জাস্ট স্টার্ট করে দেই তো।
আরে কে পড়ে গেল?
কি হলো? What the hell?
আচ্ছা Asif Hassan join the call.
It's like one of those horror movies. একটা মরতে থাকে and we waste.
আসলে
Yes.
Hey, let's start.
Okay.
Am I audible? Alright, everyone here, thank God.
আচ্ছা let's
Start,
mute the
please.
echo হচ্ছে
Everyone mute, please.
Acha, what's the side? What's the motion? Can someone please like write it down
This
somewhere so I can
house-
like look at it?
আচ্ছা ভাই তোমাকে ইনবক্স গ্রুপ চ্যাটে দিয়ে দিচ্ছি ওখানে
তুমি আমাকে
আছে
পার্সোনালি ইনবক্স করবা প্লিজ।
আচ্ছা শিওর
ভাই আমারও তোমার গ্রুপ মানে আমারও তোমার চ্যাটে যেটা দিছি ওটাই।
আচ্ছা কুল, তাহলে ওটাই। আচ্ছা কুল, এই টিমগুলো একটু বল সো আই ক্যান লাইক আন্ডারস্ট্যান্ড কাক মানে কে কখন কথা বলবে।
দিচ্ছি দাঁড়াও ওয়েট। You have OG, O is Nawed and Rifayat. CG.
পাইছি শাদমান দিয়ে দিছে। ওকে cool. All right, OG Prime Minister here. Everyone fucking like mute your mics please. আমি আমারটা মিউট করে দিচ্ছি। এখন সৌরদীপ তুই কি পিএম?
না আমি আবরার।
Okay, except
আচ্ছা
Abrar.
am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible. Everyone mute them.
Okay, starting in 10 seconds. Acha. 3, 2, 1. Right. So, ladies and gentlemen, we think in a world where the relationship between corporations and their employees and consumers are marred by problems such as discriminations on the basis of them being a minority, or marred by harassment, or where intentionally corporations decide to screw over their consumers, we think that the avenue of private arbitration, when it comes to corporations dealing with individuals, entrenches that oppression, entrenches that even further, right? So before we move on to like argumentation, just a picture of what this would probably look like. So we think that when private arbitration, that the individuals who are selected to arbitrate are who have some sort of relevance, for example, between an employer and an employee in a particular industry would probably be that arbitrator, right? Secondly, we think that often this would be decided at the time the employee's contract is going to be signed, right? So for example, when an employee is joining a particular corporation, he would have to probably consent to the fact that any future dispute would probably be solved by these arbitrators, which means that in many instances the arbitrator that would be in many instances, the arbitrator that would be suggested to the employee would be the one that the employee is more likely to opt into, right? Likely to work. So in general, we're going to do this on two levels. Firstly, in terms of why this is problematic for employees. Secondly, in terms of employees. We think that employees join corporations. We think that the moment you first of all have a corporation, which means that if your employer does you would probably be like not going
all of static.
But further, hello?
অনেক স্ট্যাটিক আছে তোর থেকে। I can't hear half of what you're saying.
Acha, what am I supposed to do
same.
I have no idea what
Continue.
You can start again, I think, because like শুনতে পাই নাই most of us.
I'm fine with you starting again, but আমি কিছু
problem
বুঝি না।
হচ্ছে তাহলে?
শোন আবরার, দেখ আমি তোকে একটা কথা বলি। So you start again, ঠিক আছে?
হ্যাঁ।
সেকেন্ডলি হলো কি তোর এখানে যে আমরা যেখানে কথা লিখতেছি, the chat box that's available, so that you make sure that you like periodically check that, so that এই যে কথা ভাঙলে আমরা এখানে তোকে বলে দিতে পারবো, and you can like sort of like দেখে একটু এক দুই লাইন পিছন থেকে যদি রিপিটটা করতে হবে, that would sort of like solve our problems. মাঝখান দিয়ে মানে কথা বলে ইন্টারভিউ না করাতে would be much better. তুই just chat box যদি চেক করতে পারোস, like আমি পিসি থেকে আসি, I can see the chat box on my left, so that's easier for all of us.
না বা যদি বেশি কেটে যায়,
হ্যাঁ, কারণ অনেক কিছু আমি বুঝি নাই, আমি তোর কেস স্পিড বুঝিনি।
আচ্ছা সৌরদীপ ভাইয়া,
সৌরদীপ তুই মিউট করে রাখছিস।
হ্যালো।
আচ্ছা হ্যাঁ শোন তোর যদি
পিএম দাও।
না তুই পিএম কর, প্যারা নাই। তোর যদি কেটে যাইতে কোনো প্রবলেম, কেটে যাওয়ার সময় কোনো প্রবলেম হয় আর সামথিং, আমি স্টপ ওয়াচ পজ করে দিব না, তখন তোকে বলবো না, তুই আবার রিসেন্ড করিস, প্যারা নাই।
বুঝতেছ না তো, সো তুমি লাইক পিএম দাও, না হলে অনেক আনক্লিয়ার থেকে যাবে।
It's not like তুমি PM না দিলে আমরা পরেটাও বুঝবো, because প্রবলেমটা তো কানেকশনে। So I think we start again.
এখানে সমস্যা হচ্ছে তার মানে।
তোরটা এখন ঠিক আছে?
তুই আস্তে আস্তে দে, কোনো সমস্যা নেই। তো এই মাঝখানে একটু একটু করে ড্রপ করে না, ওটাই সমস্যা। ওটাতে আমরা তোকে বলে দিব যেখানে ড্রপ করছে, আমরা একদম পারলে লিখে দিব যে তুই এটা বলছিস লাস্ট, এটা শুনতে পারছি। তো তখন ওখান থেকে তুই শুরু করতে হবে, তুই প্যারা খাইস না। তোর যে 7 মিনিটই কথা বলতে হবে এমন কিছু না, এখানে দরকার পড়লে 9 মিনিটের মতো কথা বলা যাবে, ওটা প্যারা না, তুই জাস্ট বল।
But if people are saying that it's an absolute blur,
অ্যাবসলিউট না, লাইক ফর ইনস্ট্যান্স আমি যেটা বুঝছি যে আর্বিট্রেটর থেকে কনসেন্ট দেওয়া হবে, এতটুকু পর্যন্ত বুঝছি। ওয়াই ইজ ইট প্রবলেম্যাটিক, তুই যে দুটো রিজন বলছো, দুটো রিজনের পরে আমি কিছু শুনি নাই, লাইক রিজনিং গুলো কি কি যে ট্যাগলাইন দিছে সেটা আমি শুনতে পারি না, বুঝছিস?
আচ্ছা
আমি খালি শুনছি প্রবলেম্যাটিক, তারপর কি
প্লিজ আমি ইন্টারনেট দেখতেছি একটু।
Why don't you like drop the call and join again? তারপর দেখি।
that could work.
আবরার মিউট করা কেন?
আপনার ইন্টারনেট দেখতেছি।
তুমি পিএম দাও না, আমি তোমাকে বলতেছি, ওরা শুনতে পাচ্ছে না আমার কথা।
শালা এতক্ষণ মিউট করে বাল পালাইতে আর বলে তুমি পিএম দাও।
শুনবে না।
আমি এতক্ষণ মিউট করি নাই ভাই, ডোন্ট ওয়ারি।
এখন কিন্তু ক্লিয়ার আছে আবার, তো এখন আবার বল, মেবি দ্যাট মাইট ওয়ার্ক, আই ডোন্ট নো, আই এম জাস্ট সেইং।
হ্যাঁ ট্রু, এখন কিন্তু একদম ক্লিয়ার আসতেছে।
আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে, তাহলে ট্রাইং সবাই মিউট করো।
ওকে
আচ্ছা রাইট, সো আসিফ ভাই স্টার্ট করলাম। 3 2 1. Right. So we think in a world where the relationship between corporations and individuals are marred by problems such as discriminating on the basis of them being a minority, or in terms of like instances of sexual harassment, we think corporations always have the upper hand in terms of in terms of the fact that they hold a lot of leverage over these individuals. Right. We think that allowing the mechanism of private arbitration enters this coercion, which is why we have a problem. So some idea of how this works. So we think when it comes to the relation between a corporation, between employer and employees, probably to an arbitration, third-party arbitration at the moment his contract with that corporation is signed, right? So we think that this is likely to happen like at that instant when the employee is joining that corporation, which means in the majority of instances we think that this individual. Acha. Am I audible?
Yeah, go on, continue.
Yeah, so we think in the majority of instances, these are individuals who are going to be suggested and recommended by that corporation. Furthermore, we think like this is not going to be some random individual. These are obviously going to be individuals who are going to have some relevance to that particular business or industry or corporation, right? So we're going to show you on 2 layers in terms of why this is bad for both employees as well as consumers, and why this should go. So firstly, in terms of employees, we think that the moment an employee opts into this mechanism, he isn't, given all the information and isn't taking this decision completely rationally. Why? For a couple of reasons. Firstly, we think that when at the moment of your employment you are given this recommendation, you probably want to go along with it because you want to enter this corporation with the goodwill, right? And even if this is hello,
Continue.
Yeah, so and even if right, so even if this is something that the corporation simply gives you, I've lost my track, oh god. Acha,
Zaid just on করছে, তুই প্যারা খাচ্ছিস কেন? স্টার্ট কর। I stop the clock at 1:57, it's fine.
Acha, so where was I? So even if, yeah, right. So corporations, we think that when you enter these corporations, you're less likely to question whether or not the corporation is, suggesting someone who is going to be averse to you in the long run, right? But more importantly, we think that individuals when joining a corporation probably think that they're going to spend their next 4 or 5 years as a normal average individual who nothing spectacular is going to happen to, which means he probably thinks that he's not going to get into a dispute, which means he never has that incentive to look into the background of this particular arbitrator. So we think at that point of joining or signing that contract, he's much less likely to be able to, take that informed decision of whether or not in the future, when these disputes happen, whether or not that arbitrator is going to be able to, help him out properly. But secondly, we don't always think that corporations have malicious intent, right? We think in general, corporations are likely to be inclined to be beneficial towards you, and you also probably would believe that corporations, won't want to do you any harm, and in general, because they're giving you benefits and whatnot, do in fact align with your your benefits. But we think when it comes to instances of specific disputes that happen, right? So if it's, say for example, charges of sexual harassment by an employer against you, we think that at that point in time the incentives of that corporation might change. So in general, we think even when corporations do in fact treat their treat their employers properly and employers, when instances such as this happen, we think that their incentives might in fact change. We think in instances like that, the corporations might in fact recommend someone who is more stringent when it comes to bringing forward evidence for like claims of sexual harassment and whatnot, right? So we think in instances like that, it's more likely that the corporations will be able to skew that decision towards themselves when it comes to their dealing with the employer, right? But secondly, right, we think that on the comparative, when it comes to how this would play out in court, understand that employers are always going to be able to afford like less effective litigation and less effective lawyers, right? But we think at least in court, these, even if these are less effective lawyers, they'll be dealing with judges, for example, they've been practicing law with for a particular amount of time. They'll be dealing with a system that they're used to. We think that the corporation's litigation army, when it comes to private arbitration, will always have a greater ability to figure out the ins and outs of that arbitrator, right? So in opposition's best case, where this is a neutral third party, the employers will always be able to figure out the motivations of these neutral third parties, or the all the motivations that these third parties have to a greater extent than the litigation of the employee is ever going to be able to do. So we think even then, when it's a neutral third party, the ability to influence that third party will always be skewed toward that particular corporation, right? Hello. Oh no, not taken, right? So furthermore, we also think that when it comes to these arbitration, right, we think that the biggest problem is that this decision is often final. What does this mean? It means that unlike the court system, where you have the ability to, if so, for example, if this decision comes out and you think this is unfair, you have the ability to appeal, right? When it comes to the decision is final, so you don't have the ability to start. This is extremely problematic in cases where the employees feel like some injustice has been done to them, which means that the moment it does,
Abrar, you stopped.
I couldn't hear the last 1 minute.
Abrar.
Oh God.
শোন
অনেক প্যারা খাচ্ছি আমি ইন্টারনেট নিয়ে।
Calm down.
Can I just stop?
Dude, calm down. Listen. So the argument about neutral third party এদেরকে যে ইনফ্লুয়েন্স তাও করা যাবে, অক্টোবর পর্যন্ত একদম ক্লিয়ারলি শুনছি। তুই যে বলছিস যে পিওআই নিব না, ওটাও শুনছি। ওটার পরের থেকে বল। I think you are starting a new argument.
আচ্ছা, হ্যাঁ, ওই আর্গুমেন্টে furthermore, we think in arbitration the decision often is final, right? So you don't have the ability to challenge it. When it comes to courts, in comparison, if you think that the final decision is one that is unfair to you, you have the ability to appeal that decision. But when it comes to arbitration, that decision is final. This is specifically problematic if the employee in question feels like some injustice has been done to him or her by that corporation, but does not have the ability to continuously challenge it. Furthermore, we think when it comes to private arbitration, often there are clauses like these, the decision making and the processes cannot be disclosed without the consent of both parties, which means it is often difficult for people who feel feel like they've been wronged and have not gotten the right decision, to build up any public will on their side when it comes to challenging that corporation, because these proceedings are often not even revealed and they don't have the ability to do that. So we think on two levels. One, because when the employees get into this contract, they're probably not going to think that 5 years down the line they're going to get into a dispute. Therefore, they probably aren't going to be able to take this decision completely. But even if these corporations give you these neutral arbitrators, it's much more likely that this will be skewed towards this corporation. Corporations deals with their consumers, right? We think that, for example, if you're dealing with your car dealer and whatnot, they're probably going to give you or suggest you an arbitrator. As a consumer, you probably aren't going to get into the nitty-gritty of who this arbitrator is. So the corporation is likely to suggest you an arbitrator who is friendly to their particular industry or friendly to their particular cause. We think there's a huge amount of probability where in instances like this, where this is a requirement for you to, say, for example, opt into buying a car, it's really it's much more likely that these corporations will take advantage of you when it comes to when it comes to like setting up your paperwork and whatnot, right? But like furthermore, right, we think on the comparative, why are judges and juries always better, right? We think that in like specific instances, these judges are selected through a process. So in a particular jury, you would always have judges who are trained under a government process, which means that these judges and their ability to be always less. First of all, because in a jury proceeding, the judge that will be like presiding over a particular case is selected arbitrarily, first of all. But secondly, like in places where you have a jury system, the individuals themselves are also selected arbitrarily. So even if litigation is more powerful on the side of the corporation, it's much more likely that that corporation that the corporation is not going to be able to influence these people to the extent that they would be able to when you allow them to choose a particular private arbitrator, because of the reasons that I previously mentioned. Can I get a time count, please?
Time's up.
Yeah, so because of that, we don't think private arbitrations should be given. Should be an option that corporations can force their employees into via contract. Thank you.
Okay, এখন Abrar প্যারা খাইস না. Before the next speech starts, I'll just take a little phone call. আমাকে just please second দে.
Abrar তো চলে গেছে প্যারা খেয়ে.
আপনার ভিডিও অন হয়ে গেছে।
কার?
Okay, hello. Who's hello?
Hear me? Guys, can you hear me?
Hey. Everyone else mute their mics. I think everyone did. So you can.
Okay.
All right.
Hey, who's going to time Nawed?
I can time myself, you guys. What about Sourodip?
What does a
I don't really think এখানে like মানে ভিডিও আচ্ছা হ্যাঁ Sourodip তুই টাইম করিস তুই একদম like লাস্ট শোন মানে 6 মিনিটে মাইক অন কইরা বলবি 6 মিনিট আর লাস্ট মিনিটে মানে বলবি টাইম শেষ ঠিক আছে তাহলে that will be easy for all of us.
Or just type 6 minutes so that the speaker doesn't get interrupted.
No, the speaker needs to know. Fuck that. Hey, তুই বলবি ঠিক আছে? Yeah, now শুরু কর.
Yeah. All right. 3, 2, 1.
To get a clear picture of this debate, we need to look past the biased characterization and the gross problems that have been missed or not even acknowledged by the government side, right? So when we come up to what the governments have actually talked to us about today, they come up and tell us that, look, corporations at the end of the day are people who have leverage over their employees and like over consumers. At the end of the day, they hire the arbitrator or they recommend an arbitrator. They neglect to tell you that the arbitrator in the course of the time, or if the arbitrator is seen as someone that you cannot trust eventually by the person, and that employee has an option to object against that arbitrator. And in a lot of the cases, even before, without it going to court, the arbitrator is changed by the corporation, but the corporation does want to maintain the goodwill. Primarily because if it gets out of the corporation, is intentionally stopping an employee from achieving some sort of recourse by blocking his access to legal arbitrators, then it can harm and tarnish the reputation of the company itself. Therefore, they allow the change of it in most cases. But even in those cases that they do not, we believe that the legal recourse allows the arbitrator to allows the person, allows the consumer, allows the employee to say that, look, we object to the arbitrator because even in cases where he feels that the arbitrator has not done a good job, the employee can simply claim that, look, we have a breach of trust. I believe that the arbitrator has carried out a wrongful way to carry out the sentence. The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that in all of these cases, the arbitrator, the person can always go to the court and say that, look, a breach of trust has happened. If the court determines that there is sufficient evidence for this to go to court and have a trial in itself, then we have a trial to begin with. Therefore, their claim that the arbitrator can do whatever they want, a company can influence them and do so insidiously, at least there's still a legal recourse that exists here. But what will team opposition tell you in today's debate? One, we will tell you how this ensures better justice. I will do so in multiple levels. And secondly, we'll tell you how this creates a better and more inclusive framework for employees. No. Moving on. First, moving on to the first thing that we're trying to talk about today. So why do we believe that there was a biased characterization? It's because when they were talking about the court system and everything, they talked about how the individual is very likely to believe that he will not have bad things happen to him, and therefore the court system itself will be quite good, in the sense that court system is not as bad as the actual system actual arbitration system. Here's the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, corporations have teams of lawyers who cross-examine the employee to the point where the employee is unable to stop himself from self-incriminating. The only places that the employee is protected from this is that it does not say something directly against himself. But in all other cases, the court system allows the teams of lawyers to intimidate the person who is being cross-examined with their shiny rhetoric and with their multiple ways that they say it. Ladies and gentlemen, they say that the court system itself, and we see the court system and celebration of cases where corporations are taken into account by the court system and forced to pay legal penalties. But these are 1 in 10 cases which are publicized. In the predominant majority of cases, which are 9/10 of the other cases, so sit down, we have 9/10 of the other cases, the court system in itself allows the win to go to the corporations, primarily because it's very difficult to go against corporations and with the team of lawyers who have hundreds of ways to, who have extreme levels of legal expertise. And the second, and does not allow the person and the individual to be able to stand up to it. Second, the idea of financing in itself. Realize that individuals are unable to stand up to the extreme amount of unable to stand up to the extreme amount of financial troubles that will take place whenever the teams of lawyers provide them with injunctions and ceasefires. So what the teams of lawyers in these court systems from corporations do is they provide hundreds of injunctions and other penalties. This drags on the process for a large period of time. This means that the process becomes very delayed, and the legal fees when the individual is unable to pursue justice eventually and actually just settles for a very small minuscule amount of money. This happens in the predominant majority of cases, ladies and gentlemen. But more importantly, negative stories are spun by the corporation and harm the reputation of the victims. Something we're talking about when we go into the arguments in itself. But the rest of the argument is integrated about the court system and the judges and jury will be integrated in the argument itself. Before moving on, yes, sir.
Don't you think there's a tension within the characterization? Because your backup plan is, if the arbitration fails, they will go to court. But now you're bashing the court system itself. So what is your backup? So why are you bashing your backup plan?
The problem with the backup system is never something that we suggested in terms of changing in itself. So the backup system was only there to suggest that the court system can simply come in and still provide access for these people for a legal recourse. The problem is we are simply criticizing the very idea that you use the court system as the penultimate and the first way in order to achieve justice for these people. Something will be explaining in our argument better. So first level, ladies and gentlemen, is the idea of the chances of justice. We tell you you that the predominant court cases are won by corporations primarily because they use financial troubles. They make the they make the entire process very lengthy, which means the person cannot sustain himself economically. But more importantly, team of lawyers hurt these individuals. Cross-examination means that these individuals hire lawyers who are unable to stand up against the teams of lawyers brought in by the corporation itself, which means these corporations almost always win these cases. The second option, the second idea, ladies and gentlemen, is that when we are choosing the arbitrator, we can decide if we are okay with it. This is not present in the court system, because at the end of the day, if we are seeing that the arbitrator is going against us, we can always refute him. We can always appeal against him by saying that he is breaching the trust, by saying and carrying out legal recourse against him. But secondly, we are still choosing an arbitrator, right? The only alternative that you need to fix Sourodip's entire context, or Abrar's entire context, is that you simply empower these people with the knowledge that they can choose their arbitrator, that they do not need to necessarily choose the arbitrator suggested by the firm, that they do not need to necessarily be grateful to the firm, and make that a norm. We don't see why the system has to change. Third, we tell you that the backlog of cases created by allowing this entire situation to exist means that this will delay justice indefinitely. What does this mean? This means that if every single one of these cases goes to court, that means hundreds of these cases will go to court every day. This means that the entire justice system gets delayed, because these cases, when they go to court, have a lot of procedural justices, which means it takes a huge period of time for each single one of these cases to be resolved. That means that anyone who has a case now will have a long period of time before his case can be resolved, especially because these cases are, these court systems are specially biased against them, primarily because these teams of lawyers provide injunctions, provide which drag out the court system for a very long time. We believe this is the principle that denies people justice, and it's a principle that we simply can't stand for in this debate. It's a principle violation, because they provide us no way that the court system can be further strengthened and can be the entire process can be fastened, and therefore we believe that principle is harmed. But fourthly, in general, we believe the personal life of the individual is always brought in by the corporation. We believe Microsoft and YouTube in last year brought in the entire personal history of the person while trying to make a court case against him. Realize when you go to the court, you are exposing the firm to a large amount of negative publicity. In order to counter that, the firm and the company usually bring up your personal life and your private life into the entire system, and that maligns your personal and private life. The impact of this is that these people are unable to work in the same industry, but more importantly, they are harmed by threatening newsletters, where they are harmed when they are intentionally seen as bad people in the society, people who are trying to subvert justice and seen as money greedy hordes. Realize that this in itself is a huge problem, because this will not be present in an arbitration system. It will always happen in a court system. We need to make sure that this doesn't happen. There is a recourse to these people. When they want to have an arbitration, they can go for that arbitration if they believe that arbitration is good for them. Why does team opposition win? Because they tell you the court system was grossly mischaracterized, but more importantly, out of all of this, we believe that the arbitration system needs to exist in order to give these people another chance. Thank you.
BPM.
Yes, arbitration. আমাকে কেউ টাইম করিস পারলে?
আমি করতেছি।
3, 2. The natural incentive of corporations that Nawed talks about essentially means that they are, in a lot of cases, overprotective of, and this is why the norm of arbitration itself, to a certain extent, has been popular. Because even if, like, the worst case scenario of that corporation, that they actually lose that arbitration case, but that arbitrator is someone that's neutral, even in those cases, these individuals are aware of the fact that in arbitration, you can only release information of that particular case if all the parties. By that, we mean that if that can show to the world that this arbitrator is particularly, like, fair and whatnot, even in the best case scenario of Nawed, they want it because they can hide everything through this particular system. And why is that so bad? Like, in their best case scenario, it's that simple reason that if there is a sexual harassment case and the corporation is guilty of it, the point at which other women who are going into this particular, who wants to join that particular corporation, will not know about it and will probably join the corporation anyway. Whereas made available to any employee that wanted to join that particular corporation. First harm, and it's true for any other breach of contract as well. Second, of these cases, these cases in are complex and in a lot of cases set precedents. By that I mean, if this is a particularly unique case that cannot be solved or can be solved to a certain extent by the books of the law, they require precedents so that later on these cases can be tried out. So if it's an extraordinary case against an extraordinary corporation with huge legal power, then if there is a particular precedent, then people can then refer back to that in case of future court cases that are brought about against similar corporations. And you lose out on that merely because of the fact that these things are all kept hidden. Not taken.
Sir,
not taken. Thirdly, we think that the point at which these corporations are to be like brought in front of their consumers of the sort of wrongdoings that they have done in that arbitration courtroom, as the individual complaining against the corporation wants to make it public, they should be able to, but this particular system hamstrings them. Why is this so very important? Even the best case scenario of opening opposition's world, we still win because there is an absolute benefit to making court cases against huge corporations public, most of the material that comes from them. But even then, they ignored the analysis of why legal expertise of like court cases versus arbitration is more amplified in case of arbitration, because as we have characterized from PM, the imbalance of legal power does not go away in any world. But why is that worse off under their side? It's because of the simple fact that the arbitrator is someone that this legal team knows, because that arbitrator is someone that's referred to constantly by that particular corporation. And individuals as human beings have certain biases and certain predilections that like lawyers are likely to know. So if it's the same simple principle. If a particular lawyer is exposed to a particular judge or a particular group of jury for a long time, which does not happen by the way in the court case system, then that particular lawyer is likely to figure out the weaknesses or positions of this particular judge or jury, which does not happen in case of courts, but it's likely to happen in case of an arbitrator, because in a lot of cases these arbitrators do not change, because an arbitrator in a lot of cases are constantly selected and referred to by a particular corporation. And this is very important because all of their analysis where they say that legal expertise of the corporations are things that result in a breakdown of the court system is actually worse off under their side. We think the comparative is very clear. But then they tell you that the backlog is something that's harmful. We tell you that regrettably, we do recognize that in a lot of cases, the trade-off is that you probably in certain cases have delayed justice. But that also ignores the material coming from our side. When you recognize that delayed justice to a certain extent is better than some form of biased justice, because they have ignored the fact that when you step into this particular contract, the level of irrationalness in your particular case, where you do not want to go against the corporations. They tell you that an individual will probably go for a background check. We tell you that that is, in a lot of cases, too difficult. In a lot of cases, creating too much hassle for consumers and everyone as well together. We think that is a huge chunk of analysis of the PM speech that they ignore, that's still standing without any particular response to it. But before I move on,
yeah, POI?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so realize that in most cases, when you say that court cases set a precedent, first, these are very few. But secondly, even if these cases are so amazing and revolutionary, they will go to court anyway, because most big lawyers and big firms will love the chance to sue big corporations, given that large cases and great cases are probably things that attract a lot of publicity. In alternative scenarios, the vast majority of cases don't.
Okay, I did not understand the POI because it got closed down. But the thing that I can extract from that particular POI is that the mechanism of arbitration itself shuts down on any sort of public discourse that results out of this particular court case. So I don't really know how or why is this particularly relevant in ops world, because they have to defend a world where they're okay with these cases remaining private all the time, because I've already talked about the particular impacts of this remaining private and rather than not public in and of itself. But we also think, furthermore, that the justice system in a jury, or if you're a judge rather than an arbitrator who is likely to be a professional in a lot of cases, is that in a jury or in a judge you have a more humane humane sort of touch to justice itself. And that's why we value the jury system, and that's why we value the judge system. So for example, if there is an emotional aspect to crime, if there is like some sort of intent involved to crime, we think a judge or a jury is far better in understanding than a particular arbitrator, an industry professional and whatnot. And why this important, and why should the state intervene in this particular case? Because the state itself is the only actor who should be able to enforce such contracts where there's an imbalance of power between these two actors and act like in favor of the vulnerable group in this particular system, meaning that the state itself is the only legitimate actor from Gov's world that we support for the plethora of reasons that we've already given you. Because we have no idea why private arbitration should be a thing, because we have no idea. I believe that there is a lawyer army from the corporation. How does that work in their favor? We're incredibly proud to propose.
Rifayat.
You have 30 seconds.
15.
Messenger.
15. Please take 15 seconds. Please take 15 seconds. Now you have only 7 seconds.
I'm ready. Keep bear করে নিচ্ছি. All right. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Go. See, the idea is corporations and individuals specifically create a very skewed case whenever they're taken to court. Why do we specifically push for this characterization, right? Because understand that corporations come with twofold of power when they go to court. They, one, have a lot of money, and two, they attract a lot of publicity. Understand that when these corporations go to court, there are a lot of different factors in play, such as the fact that they can hire a huge group of lawyers who can argue their case for them. And understand that it's not as Sourodip paints it out to be, right? Because what exactly does the court system look like in today's world, and what exactly are the tactics used by lawyers to win these cases? A jury is not someone who knows the law. A jury is a set of normal citizens. Lawyers win cases by appealing to those juries' emotion specifically, not as Sourodip points it out, right? Lawyers specifically are judged by the way they approach the cases, right? Lawyers tactfully use the court or use the court space to make sure that the defendant is painted out as someone, like the characteristic is brought into play, because that is exactly what the jury wants to buy. That is exactly what sells to the jury. What we bring to you is the idea that often this sort of seeking for personalities or seeking for characters leaves out what's the most at stake. From Nawed's speech, he made it clear to you why we find this particularly problematic, right? It's because understand that often most people would not even go to seek justice to begin with. Nawed specifically pointed out to you how this creates a huge delay within the court system. A lot of people often fear the intimidation or the fear of being cross-checked into like a fear of being cross-checked by lawyers, and hence they never go out to seek the justice. Understand that when you move into this sort of when you move into this system, what happens is these individuals are then given the right, or these individuals are given the privilege of choosing their own private arbitrators. It's not like Sourodip and Abrar would like to tell you that these people are picked out by the corporations themselves, because as we have told you, we don't necessarily see why that's the case, right? We have explicitly showed you how these individuals themselves will have a say in which arbitrator is picked for the cause. We have specifically showed you why the corporations will have an incentive to ensure that this privilege is given to their employees themselves, because otherwise it paints a far worse image for their company that they're obstructing their employees' right to justice, right? But furthermore, let's go into the nitty-gritties of what they've suggested to you. They suggested that discrimination is a problem, and that they've suggested that the corporations will figure out the ins and outs of the neutral party, and the decision is often final, and that's it, that they have no say, right? Understand that we don't necessarily think that this private arbitrator will necessarily be picked out by the corporation because the corporation has an active incentive to ensure that the court does not come after them in the worst case scenario by painting a very bad picture of the company, right? But furthermore, we also tell you how the economic values about how these individuals will not necessarily have the money to go forward and always, hire the best lawyers. The best case scenario that they can suggest is that they will be given a state-sponsored lawyer, but we often tell you how the state-sponsored lawyers are absolutely worse than any private arbitrator that you can pick out. Why is that? Because the state-sponsored lawyers don't have an active incentive to make sure that their clients win because they're not paid on commission privately by any individuals for it, as these corporations do. They have yet to defend how their court system ensures that these corporations will not simply hire the best lawyer, and these lawyers won't look for loopholes within the cause which will allow their corporations to win, right? But furthermore, what else do we tell you? We tell you that there is a significant chance that the team of lawyers will influence the arbitrator himself, right? So understand that this is not exclusive to their cause, where we're often seen that the jury is very swayed by corporations as well. Why do we particularly believe that this is more harmful under their case? Because the jury is more likely to see the idea that these are very large corporations. What happens when these large corporations go to court and these cases become public? You have a more absolute set of generalized views of what these cases sound like, right? So every single time a woman goes to court for a case of sexual harassment where she says that her boss has sexually harassed her, right? These then become generalized cases that people look for, and this inevitably become the reasons why people will think twice about hiring women into the company, because they think that the moment you hire them, there is a greater risk that you will go to court. There's a greater risk that this is what women are like. Notice that this cherry picking of cases will not happen when you allow a private arbitrator. Their fear that this private arbitration means that less people know about the cases does not hold, because what exactly is your objective? Is your objective to ensure that more people know about it, or is your objective to ensure that there's a solution to it? Often when you go to court, the solution ends up being giving a certain amount of money to ensure that your corporation goes away with it, right? We believe that when you hire a private arbitrator, that is better mitigated, because you ensure that you come to a consensus solution, which is not where you don't necessarily place a monetary value on any of the problems, right? Before I proceed, yes, your POI.
So if indeed your characterization is so goddamn true and the companies are going to win every court case, then why do these companies choose to go to arbitration in the very first place?
See, the companies will not choose to go into arbitration. Obviously, as we have shown you, the companies don't want the publicity to begin with, right? And hence they would want to go for a more quiet solution of the problem. But secondly, we also tell you how given the probability, these individuals will always find it more difficult to make sure that their case stands in court, specifically when the lawyers target their own personality, when the lawyers bring their own past into question, none of which might actually be of relevance to the case, right? But understand, all of those nevertheless create a negative impression on the jury, and that's exactly where the problem lies, right? Whenever you have a neutral party, all these different tactics then become void, because you now have to argue with the matter that's given to you, right? So what exactly have we given to you today? We have shown you how this incentive to seek justice is removed from people when you push onto them the intimidation of the court. We have shown you how the economic value often stop them. We've also shown you how the court often sways away from what's really at stake. We have also shown you how lawyers and rich corporations will often have a very large incentive to look for loopholes in order to ensure that their client wins at no matter what cost, right? To conclude, we tell you that the issues within corporations are not something that's always a criminal offense, because those will go to court anyways. But what we do want to see is that even those small things reach their solutions, which often don't, because people are scared to even go to court with them to begin with.
Okay, so that concludes the upper house. Did you guys have dinner? Fucking no one had dinner.
I didn't.
Fuck, I need to. So, member of government, Adi. Cool, bro. Okay, shuru kar.
শুনতে পাচ্ছ? Okay, cool. আচ্ছা guys, hello.
বল।
আচ্ছা তো আমি POI 6 মিনিটে নিব, হ্যাঁ, আর আপার থেকে নিব, ঠিক আছে? আগে থেকে বলে রাখলাম, তো 6 মিনিটে আমি নিজে জিজ্ঞেস করবো না, ওকে? তো কারোর রেস করা লাভ নেই, ওকে? ওকে, গ্রেট। আচ্ছা, so I think the problem with this debate is like both sides have kind of like ignored or haven't acknowledged the trade-offs involved within this debate, right? So from government, what are we willing to trade off? We're willing to trade off the empowerment of the agency of an individual to make a decision for himself or herself over whether or not they want to go into court in the very first place. And our extension will be as such that why in reality this choice is invalid and something that the state can act upon. But secondly, we'll talk about corporations and why we need more information about them within the public sphere so that state can hold them further accountable. But there are certain integrated rebuttals within the arguments. So first of all, we think like opening of cases is extremely faulty in general, because they tell you that this court, if these things go to court, corporations are likely to win when like every single time. But then they tell you that if the arbitrator is actually unfair, people have the chance to like go back and appeal within the court. But isn't your backup mechanism flawed at that point in time? Because you're relying on the same flawed system to hear the appeals in the very first place. You need to clear that out from like from CO if they go on with that model in the very first place. Secondly, they talked about long court cases and how justice is denied within this sort of places. We think number one, if this court cases are indeed that long, we think there are more courts and more judges accessible, so this like cases could go faster. And we don't think this is something that's impossible. The like England did the same for the NHS when there was like a huge case filed against them. We think this is something that is logistically solvable under status quo. But thirdly, they talk about how these court cases are designed to make the victims lose in general. We tell you no, because number one, we think like the era of consumerism that we have right now is of activist consumerism, which is to say that if consumers know that Nike is in a court case because its CEO sexually assaulted a worker, or Horlicks is in a court case because they had one faulty like Horlicks bottle which led to the death of one particular child, we think there will be huge peer pressure on the courts and on the lawyers in general to make sure that they put a strong enough case, because we live in an era of like very activist consumerism. So if they see a wrongdoing, they'll definitely support the victim. So it's not as easy as that like companies are going to dominate court cases in general. But secondly, if these are people without agency, we think there are enough like social institutions right now to give them that level of agency. Like we have in Bangladesh, we have special councils set up just for garment worker and just for like people who work within the shipbuilding in tannery, right? So we think like these are social institutions do exist that help individuals and give them agency to defend themselves within these sort of situations. So we don't think that they're absolutely designed to lose these sort of cases. There's enough agency out there at that point in time. But what is the trade-off over here? The trade-off over here is this, that see, in our world, even if they might lose that court case, there's still enough avenues for them to go out there and seek information and seek like a form of justice. Under your word, you like kind of tell me that the arbitrator is absolutely fair, when open government continuously gave you reasons as to why this arbitrators are never likely to be fair, why these arbitrators need like these companies for them to have jobs in the very first place. It's a huge dependency that exists within the arbitrators and the individuals like and the corporations, right? So your world isn't fairer than ours in the very first place. Our world is actually much more fairer. If there are logistical issues, we can just attempt to make those things right. Under your world, those attempts are absolutely like non-existent. But lastly, the biggest case was how these people are cross-examined in court, and how hence as a result, like their images drag to the mud. But that's like saying that we can't allow these individuals to seek justice because a greater injustice is going to happen to them. We think even in a worst case scenario, if their image is tarnished and dragged through the mud, we can't allow corporations to get away with these sort of things. We can't allow corporations to pay minimum fees to a worker who has been sexually harassed without acknowledging that the company is liable. Because the trade-off is this: sure, one person's image might get dragged to the mud, but the cost is this: that future sexual harassment cases and people within the company get encouraged to commit these sort of cases even further. So even if it means one person's image getting dragged to the mud, we're more than happy to take this trade-off if future victims are helped under our model. right? So the concrete positive extensions. Number one, let's look at the nature of these cases, and we'll talk about a consumer and like corporation relation in general. Corporations, why do they go for arbitration? Because if you believed OO's calculation, they would never go for arbitration because they would win every case. Why do they go into arbitration? Because A, they want to ignore like bad publicity. So what are the cases we're talking about? For example, if a Horlicks product has a defect within it and causes sickness amongst children, or for example, if a Toyota car has a brake failure and they don't want the consumer base to know. In these sort of cases, because they want to ignore this sort of bad publicity, because this is something that they are competition will harp upon, because this is something that like media will bash them for. They use this as a scapegoat option to make sure that they ignore this adversity that might harm these sort of businesses. We think we can't allow these individuals or corporations in general to get away with this sort of like bad things over and over again. Why is this relevant in this sort of scenario? Because essentially the principle here is this: why don't we allow arbitration in case of rape or in case of assault and battery? Because we want individuals to know that there is this evil person in society that you need to stay away from. Even though the harm is personal, because you assault only one person, you still want society to know that bad individuals exist and you need to stay away from these sort of individuals. We think in this sort of situation, the same logic applies. When you know that Horlicks has a defect, or when you know Toyota has a defect, they cater to humongous consumer bases. The trickle down effect is to a huge part of the society who if they don't know that there is a problem within the product, who if they don't know that there's a problem within that particular car, might get harmed because of you. Hence, we think this choice is invalid, because your choice to remain silent or your choice to get a small settlement might end up harming a lot of individuals within the future. I'll maybe more than happy to take a POI now.
Right.
Okay. Well,
when you talk about the image getting dragged through the mud, right? This isn't only the impact isn't only that the person gets harmed. The impact is that this person gets intimidated enough that this court case never eventually evolves beyond giving that individual justice anyway, because the person intimidated enough not to continue suing the person. This happens here a lot.
Now I get the point. Now I agree with you, and this is the exact threat that companies use when they force these people to go to arbitration. They tell you, "We drag your image to the mud. We'll never finish this case in the very first place." These are problems, and these problems simply don't get away with arbitration, because in arbitration they face the same amount of harm as well. But lastly, now that we've proven to you this principle, this you can't allow this choice to exist. But lastly, we think it's harder for state to hold companies accountable, because information is extremely important, and these companies are extremely clever, and what they try and do is they try and curtail any information that might be out there against them. How do they do this? By using methods of arbitration, by using methods of settlement within these sort of cases. We think the more we dive into this sort of choice, these companies go away scot-free. We think even in this sort of situations, even if the victims lose, we think it gives the government enough option and enough leverage to act on these companies in the future. So even if a few people might get harmed right now, we think, and even if they don't get compensated, we think under our worst case scenario, government has more information about these companies, about this corporations, and they can act on in the future. With that, we're very proud to propose.
Alright, so guys, try to keep it within 7 minutes. I'm gonna take a 30-second break. So আমি আপাতত আনমিউট করে আমি 30 সেকেন্ডের জন্য অন্যদিকে চলে যাচ্ছি, তোরা কথা বল।
Sreyan.
Oy Sreyan.
হ্যাঁ ভাই বল। ইয়া ভাই শুনতেছি।
হ্যাঁ আমি গেলাম, নামাজ পড়তে হবে, ঠিক আছে? আল্লাহ হাফেজ।
ওকে ব্রো।
রাত 12টার সময়
হ্যাঁ তো কি পূজা করবো? হালার বুত তোরা ইয়ে কর,
লাইভ আছে।
ও ফাক, সরি I respect all religions. I respect all religions equally.
Allah.
All gods.
Hey, Zayed doesn't respect all religions. He doesn't respect any religion.
Cable, sir.
শালা লেখে চুপ থাক।
Religion.
I am like the most respectful. I'm a লেখা থেকে পাস। Religion is in my bones.
Very controversial statement.
Right. So who's CO? CO1.
Shadman.
Okay, cool. Why did Adi leave the group chat again? আদি কি চলে গেছে একদম পুরোপুরি?
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ ভাই মানে আদি ভাই মানে থাকবে না সমস্যা নাই
And why did Kazi Fardin Ishaq suddenly join?
Hello.
Because he wants to see the debate, I think.
Yeah, the debate's over. এই Kazi Fardin Ishaq পুরো মিউট করে বসে থাক, কোনো কথা বলবি না।
আরে আসিফ ভাই কেমন আছেন?
আরে হালা কথা কইবি না, চুপ। এই সে এখন কি স্পিচ দিবে সাতমান, রাইট? এই Shadman, whenever you're ready.
Okay, give me 10 seconds.
Sure.
Okay, ready? Am
Yeah,
I
ready,
audible?
sure, go.
Okay.
Yeah. You're cool.
In my speech, I will tell you, regardless of going to the court, why arbitrations should exist for corporation versus individuals. I will tell you exclusively why in cases of corporations, this is necessary for us to get more justice. And finally, I will tell you why the consistent model coming from both sides, upper and lower house from that side, is why we need public disclosure and public discourse essentially is a flawed model for justice system to begin with. Let's start with engaging with them first. According to them, they believe it's important for information of courts to get out in order for us to have better justice and to be better prepared for future. First, we are assuming that in a case, and they conceded to that, in their best case, even if the court system doesn't work, this information would be out in the public, and that is how more people will be able to know. There will be a public discourse about this. The problem is, we think it is quite abhorrent that you are contingent on a public reaction in order for you to have proper work of in order for you to make sure the justice system functions properly, because you will be quite unlucky if you don't have enough public response for your cause. That means only few cases that are able to garner public sympathy will be the ones prioritized under your model. Rest of them don't have any alternative whatsoever. Second, the biggest problem from opening house was that what if more women are misled into working in a corporation where their chances of being harassed is very, very high. Look, there are quite a few problems with these ideas. First, you don't understand the nature of corporations to begin with. It's not like one person works in a telecom industry and the next day he's working in another entirely different industry. The way how corporate employees work are they shift from one industry, they shift from one company to another, usually within the same industry. For example, one employee shifting from one telco to another telco. Why is this characterization so important? This is because in most cases, companies and also have tried to maintain a certain amount of goodwill. Why is this important? Because in your best case, you say that whenever they're entering these companies, they will try to have some form of consent letter where only reason employees will consent is because they want to maintain a goodwill within the company. If that is the case, we are okay with it, because that culture of goodwill also impacts the company as well. That means the company also tries to make sure employees are treated well inside those places. That means the company has a good peer image because most of the branding of these companies of employability are done from peer to peer. That means the culture of goodwill, if exists because of arbitration, if the consent letter is what initiates a culture of goodwill inside that country, we think that is definitely going to exist from both sides. We're more than okay with that existing. But in a case where there is an option that a person can go to the court and file a court case against the corporation, and that person decides that he or she does not want to go to the court and file that, but wants to have a private arbitration where that person and the corporation both agree to it. What happens then? We think this happens for many reasons. First, because most of the cases, the individual who is probably the victim, wants a no bullshit court process. Why is this important? Because we think it is not just about heavy lawyer fees or prolonged cases in the court per se. It's about having the belief that you will get the justice at some point. This belief is important because unless you have this kind of belief, it's very difficult for someone to go through all of those problems, to stall your present progress, probably going to work, thinking about your children's school, thinking about your current problems, and focusing on something that happens in the past and yearning for justice for that sort of thing. I think it's difficult for people to prioritize getting justice through a difficult method when they can't see this justice working out at the end. If arbitration allows them to have the belief that that system will work and they will get justice, I think that's more than okay for us to have. One should respect that alternative for individuals. What is the exclusive contribution that we give you? I will take it in the 6 minutes. The exclusive contribution that we give you is first, why we think more justice will be there. Because understand the context of this debate. We agree to that characterization that corporations mostly want to operate on secrecy and they don't want to share information. What they didn't tell you and they conveniently avoided is a lot of loopholes that are existent in the corporate structure, not because the corporations would actively like it, but they actually need to protect a lot of people at the same time. For example, in a case where one employee is accusing another employee, and the case goes to the court, it's very difficult for the corporation to release particular personal information of the accused employee, not because they're absolutely horrible people, but they're bound by the contract that they signed when this person entered. So even if the corporations have the best of interests, a lot of times justice cannot be pursued because of this legal loopholes that exist, which cannot be revealed in the court because the information will be public. Before I conclude this, yes, Shreyan.
Ami?
Acha, whoever it is.
All right.
I'll take
Abrar. In cases where that individual is fearful of privacy, even within court cases, because you have a jury or a judge, you can use that jury or a judge to get a private settlement, like worst case scenario. But in your world, the arbitrator, according to our analysis, is more likely to be biased. How do you tackle that?
No, you're getting it wrong. We're not talking about the victim trying to protect privacy. We think, okay, let's say the victim tries to protect privacy. But the reason why most of these court cases eventually don't work out and reach a deadlock is because the corporation is legally unable to release information about the accused. That means you can't release a lot of information to the jury because you have legally signed contract where the corporation has to protect individual information. So that is what we're saying. We think in most cases in court, these eventually reach a deadlock where a lot of information aren't revealed. Some informations are existent, not because corporations are horrible, because they're legally binded by these things. We think it's far better if far better of a world where corporations can reveal all the things in arbitration and individuals as well. There's a no bullshit procedure where even in the worst case, there is lesser amount of settlements that the victim is getting. We still think there is a justified amount of settlement based on maximum amount of information. Because let's face it, corporations will reveal more and we will have more avenue to avoid the red tapes. We should win.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Nawed, could you please mute your mic? You need to say that. I wanted to get any cool to think over like.
All right, should I start?
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
The CEO's case constitutes of two things. That understand we need to respect an individual's right to say no to bullshit, and secondly, how we need to stop red tape from occurring, and why we need to protect corporations who can't maneuver through loopholes. Knocking them down, number one. Understand this. If you're talking about loopholes of corporate structure and information release, these sorts of things, one, we think in usual contracts, in terms of legal battles, it's written in the contract that if it's a legal battle, you can expose information necessary that the court essentially wants. But secondly, if you think that loopholes of, you can't expose information to the court, how the hell are you going to expose that same information to to an arbitrator who's someone extremely private? We think if the legality is that it's just between you and the corporation, it applies for everyone. So we don't think that it is exclusively beneficial or exclusively solved under your world. But secondly, the fact that, we need to respect an individual's right to say no to bullshit, and his comfort. Understand, one, we think, ladies and gentlemen, on a comparative, this is why Shadman really needed to refute Adi Bhai's principle. We told you your your want of no bullshit and comfort can be traded off in principle if we can show to you that there's a higher societal harm that is caused by you seeking comfort. I'll show to you this in the latter part of my speech. So I'll be dealing with three things. I'll first tell you why there will be more corporate accountability. Second, I'll talk to you about principle and why the principle trade-off is worth it. And lastly, I'll talk to you about government control. Let's talk about corporate accountability firsthand, right? So they tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that guess what? Corporations would be more accountable under opposition's world if they for some reason have a private arbitrator, because you know what, the private arbitrator is going to be just. Understand this. We think, ladies and gentlemen, disallow here makes a very, very poor concession, which is the two most important powers of a company is money and publicity. We think, ladies and gentlemen, the reason why accountability doesn't exist for a court is because it's quite simple. That a company, when it is competing with a singular individual, has more money and lobbying power against that individual. We think the financial incentive that it can offer to an individual who's seeking justice is so high, we think, ladies and gentlemen, it is easy for them to shut them off. We think, ladies and gentlemen, corporations have a social responsibility of making good products for the all of society. We think the moment in time these cases occur, Adi Bhai clearly showed you that the ability of these corporations to shut people up is very, 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 strong, right? In comparison to a court where your finances don't apply there. Okay, fine, you have a lot of lawyers, but we told you how these lawyers can be countered by social organizations that help you with lawyers, public lawyers, etc. You cannot, the possibility of you bribing, justice is significantly less on a comparative of how you can bribe, let's say, a private arbitrator. But the second thing, ladies and gentlemen, we told you the reason why corporate accountability doesn't exist is because coercion of consumers, ladies and gentlemen, again, specifically that characterization that everyone conceded to, the fact that they can threaten to increase the law case for like years and years, where it becomes very strenuous on your end, right? We tell you they can do even more with the private arbitrators, because they can tell you that guess what, these private arbitrators are in my control, or the fact that they can leave you personal threats as well. Something that can be countered by the court and not by a private arbitrator who has very little say over the corporation, we think, ladies and gentlemen. But lastly, a little bit of engagement to the upper case. They say that the reason why corporations are more strong in court is because they have teams of lawyers that intimidate employees. We think, ladies and gentlemen, one, Adi Bhai already told you why they're bashing the backup plan that they own set up, but also, more importantly, we think, ladies and gentlemen, one-to-one intimidation, ladies and gentlemen, is far more than an intimidation in a public court where you do not have direct links or ties with the court system. In conclusion, no thank you, in conclusion, we think corporations would be much more accountable in a public platform where anything and everything that they do will be countered by social justice and, ladies and gentlemen, the public. Whereas when it happens on a one-to-one scale, their power and their size in and of itself counters everything. The second thing about principle, and here's where the CEO didn't engage one bit. We think, ladies and gentlemen, that the moment in time your ability to deal with things personally can be countered is when it has a social harm. So we told you in the vast majority of cases where it's either Horlicks who gives faulty products, or it's GlaxoSmithKline making wrong medicines, or a Toyota when he essentially makes cars that don't have good brakes, we think it has a societal impact. You happen to be the first one it hit. If you, ladies and gentlemen, choose to keep it private for your comfort, the fact that other people don't know will cost them lives. We tell you state has an active responsibility to other individuals. So we tell you that the state needs to bash this corporation publicly so that people understand to stay away from them. We think, ladies and gentlemen, that doesn't happen under their will. Upper.
Oh.
So, at the end of the day, if there's a case where a person got hit by someone struck and everything, this is likely to be published in a newspaper, it's likely to get very unlikely this will arbitration. Your impact is important.
I'm sorry, I did not get that POI because it was relatively it was static. I'm sorry, didn't get that POI. No, thank you. Okay, sorry about that. But understand, ladies and gentlemen, the comparative here is simple. Would you prioritize a person's comfort in a cost of more social harm? We think, ladies and gentlemen, as a state, you have the right to restrict the things that cause more social harm. We think, ladies and gentlemen, the principle is much more heavier under our side. But lastly, and most importantly, again, something that is not engaged by CEO at all. We think, ladies and gentlemen, the reason why government needs some control over these corporations are quite simple, because they need to make sure that the corporations are in check. The more and more times you take corporations and deal with them personally, the more and more away they are from the hands of the government, i.e. the courts. We think, ladies and gentlemen, government itself cannot ensure accountability because you don't let them deal with these corporations at the court of justice, where they can actually make sure that they can counter the corporation's power with government power. We think for all these reasons, CG takes this debate home.
So is Zayed judging?
Not really, no.
Nope.
What?
Nope.
This is really weird, but okay. So last speaker, you're with. এটার পরে I either might give a very brief feedback here because I have to rush to get cigarettes, or আমি হয়তো feedback record করে একটা পাঠিয়ে দিতে পারি, whichever is like convenient.
Feedback, please.
আচ্ছা, cool. তাহলে নসিন তাড়াতাড়ি স্পিচটা শেষ করে ফেলো।
আমার ফিডব্যাক এখানে দিয়ে দাও, পরে আমরা প্রাইভেটলি তোমাকে নক করে নিয়ে নিব, ঠিক আছে?
Cool, কোনো সমস্যা নেই। ওকে,
থ্যাংক ইউ।
নসিন স্পিচটা দিয়ে দাও।
হ্যাঁ, can you hear me?
Yes.
আচ্ছা, ইকো হচ্ছে cuz লাস্টের দিকে ইকো হচ্ছিল শ্রেয়ানের স্পিচ।
না, শ্রেয়ানের স্পিচ ইকো আমি পাইনি, তোমারটাও ঠিক আছে।
আচ্ছা, cool, ঠিক আছে। 3, 2, 1. The failure of both government teams in this debate was to show us why a person shouldn't even have a scope for holding corporations accountable in a different context, given that there's some probability of getting justice done there. They fail to understand that the court system exists in our world as well. We are not negating it out, but if we can show to you, which we did from the first speaker, and I'll give you more in my comparatives, that in our version of the world, from the private arbitrators, there is scope for individuals to get some form of justice, ladies and gentlemen. We think that the citizens should have the right to access both forms of litigation, the court and the private arbitrators. The government didn't exclusively tell us why, even if a little scope exists in that case, why they shouldn't have access to that. But going on to more the contentions of this debate where the engagements happen, right? So firstly, why principally individuals shouldn't have the right to private arbitrators. The CG's case was mainly that guess what? Public responses are important. Individuals need to be able to, and OG talked about it as well, that individuals need to know about everything. Private settings are bad. Firstly, understand that if victims keep not getting justice from your courts, it sets a worse precedence from your sides because it discourages people to go to courts even more, ladies and gentlemen. It makes them opt for the option of out-of-court settlement under your world more, ladies and gentlemen. So you don't really solve that problem. If you think that public responses or public feedback is what dictates a court system to be, in your world you still get deterred by it. And we do not think that it should be contingent upon that either. We believe that, ladies and gentlemen, the moment in time a private setting is set, a corporation has more incentive to cooperate with you and whatnot. And there was no engagement from Sreyan on this. Shadman specifically told you how exactly a corporation fails to give out certain information due to non-disclosure agreements with its employees, which he will be more willing to do in a private setting, simply because in case of the private setting, he doesn't have the threat of it being released on a public forum or a lot of people knowing about it, and he's not going to be pressurized to release his documents, ladies and gentlemen. But more importantly, they fail to absolutely engage to our extension of how corporations themselves have a goodwill to maintain an image. And understand, because you're talking about corporations who are consumer-based, who run consumer-based business, they have more incentives to make sure that the consumer is happy. Sure, we're not going to deny that they try their best to screw them over, but understand, in a private setting where the corporation and the individual both agree to a third party, they have more reasons to not show hostility and try to come to a moderate resolution. Because in court, the corporation knows that if he loses the case, there is no way he can try to argue the negotiation terms and whatnot. At least in this case, the third party is someone who's not just giving the verdict, but is also going to take into consideration of what the subjective needs of both parties are. And we think that's better. But more importantly, understand that their principal argument is negated the very moment we tell you how individuals themselves have a right to access to this certain kind of private settings, and they do not tell us how the government have the right to take that away from them. But more importantly, understand the question regarding why the backup plan is still a better solution to have. Understand the concept regarding the belief that people need in order to get justice. And again, no engagement from Sreyan on this. We told you how in litigation there are several problems that doesn't allow an individual to always be able to get the justice he wants in due time. And this is excruciatingly important because understand the very reason corporates get to threat these individuals in out-of-court settlements or give them monetary incentives to settle certain things is because the litigation goes for months and months in courts and the individuals simply cannot pay the lawyers to do so. Because the government side did not give us any alternative or even try to mitigate the excessive harms that we talked about regarding the court justice system, we think that this point still stands. More importantly, understand in our version of the world, the person has a better reason to fight for his justice because now he has been given another chance to get his particular form of justice that he wants. And why is this excruciatingly important in this debate? Because we want individuals to feel comfortable when they're asking for justice. If individuals do not think that they're comfortable in a certain setting, we think their motivation to fight for their right automatically goes away. The moment you allow them to have a one-to-one interaction, and I don't buy Sreyan's analysis of how a person is going to be more intimidated in a one-to-one reaction because he didn't give any analysis to begin with, he just made a claim. But more importantly, understand in a one-to-one reaction where a person gets to choose, I'll take that later, understand when a person gets to choose who his arbitrator is, he's more likely to open up to him about his needs and not grossly defend his side. And this is very important. Understand, we're trying to talk about a moderated version of the world where we allow both the parties to be able to pick someone who understands both their sides and doesn't shy away or automatically buy into a confirmation bias of either victim's card or corporation's money card. But before I move on, yes. PY? No? No
Yeah.
PY? Okay, fine.
Yeah,
Moving on,
yeah.
moving on.
So-
No, sorry,
so
time. Achha, so as I was saying, why corporate disputes specifically need to protect a certain group, and understand here specifically, when you say that courts are so that corporations are so much thick in money that they can control courts, we will admit and consider to some extent that in our world that happens too. So you have two worlds where in both cases corporations have a lot of money and they can influence both parties. Government doesn't give you a solution as to how you're going to rise against those corporations, except for Adibha talking about social groups, which really didn't make much sense, because again, social groups won't contest against billions of dollars. But in our version of the world, where the victim or the individuals gets to pick the arbitrator and gets to feel like he has a say in his legal system, and the corporation itself feels like he can now have a more moderated conversation with the individual, because he's not setting out his lapdog of a lawyer out against him in a court. We think both the parties have more incentives to come to a resolution rather than just hit each other to win a case, and we think that's a better version of the world. And because we give you a moderated solution of this version of the world, we take this debate home. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So everyone's here, right? Sure. So একদম very brief একটা feedback দিই, তারপর ধর নাইলে আমি একদম নিজেই একটা proper better feedback ready করে আমি একটা পাঠাইলাম. So a very initial ranking. I'm a little confused as well. So my first call, I think I gave CG first. I'm confused between the upper house who gets second, but I'm leading towards OG for a second. It's a bench win right now in my head. OO takes a second and CO takes a OO takes a third and CO takes a fourth. Very brief justification. I felt there are a few things. I think it's important, firstly in the upper house. I think ekhane basic jhamelata hoise. So it's very important the upper house, like when you're pushing forward with your arguments, you need to do your comparatives right. I think the only little shred of comparatives that I sort of like saw in this debate in the upper house actually came from Sourodip particularly, most probably because by the DPM speech that ultimately turned into this situation 1 versus situation 2 debate, which is why I felt that ultimately like ঘুরে ফিরে তোমার it made sure that Sourodip gives out his comparatives. However, like this, I felt that Rifayat could also use that particular idea. However, Rifayat's speech there was this like really interesting idea that I saw. Like for instance, এই জিনিসটা আরো আগে থেকে আসলে like even যদি এই particular ideaটা Nawed যখন push করছিল just এক না দুই লাইনে that it sets precedents and it sets standards. I think এই particular ideaটা আরো আগে থেকে আসলে আর অনেক ভালো করে analysis থাকলে would have had like at least initially would have had like a good chance for you guys to like take second and even first as well. The idea is like how when if because of these juries and how they sort of like view large corporations, there will be like generalized views and how industry specific standards will be created that এই ইন্ডাস্ট্রিতে মহিলা নিলে বেশি কোর্ট কেসেস আসে, সো মহিলাদেরকে নিবই না। So এই particular সমস্যাগুলো আরো কি consequences থাকতে পারে in the courtroom, even in arbitration and then in employment and in social discourse. I think that's something that you guys like could have talked about a bit more in terms of like understanding where the debate happened in the upper house. I particularly felt that when you come and tell me that corporations will act a lot on goodwill, and because they do not want negative, particularly do not want negative publicity, they will essentially allow their own employees who are experiencing dispute with the company a lot of freedom, so that they can work with their arbitrators freely, and then reach a conclusive decision where all parties are agreeing to the decision. I found that particular premise of that argument was particularly flawed. So when OG and even like in CG, when they kept on continuously questioning that that's not how it usually works, arbitrator like rather like on a very like absolute worst by absolute best, whatever case it is, these are professionals, these are not even lawyers or anything. like era কিন্তু they're trained to like work for the corporation. So these aren't, so even in like in the third party যেটা Abrar এসে একদম preemptively বলে দিছিল যে even in like একদম neutral third party agent যদি হয়, how it's so easy for them to be biased and have that biased view when they go into solving these particular disputes. I felt that তোদের যদি like particularly Nawed speech থেকে যেহেতু এটা আসছে, I felt that তোর যদি এই প্রেমিসটা ভাঙা দরকার মানে যেহেতু দরকার ছিল, you really needed to like add a lot more analysis to first to like take down Abrar's characterization, কারণ ওটা 2 না 3 লেয়ারে আসছে। সো তুই একটা নরমাল রেসপন্স দিয়ে তারপর চলে যেতে পারোস না, বুঝছস? সো ওই 2 থেকে 3 লেয়ার পুরোপুরি ট্যাকল করে তারপরে নামতে হবে। সো when you give me, so when there is a very nuanced analysis of how like in any way how you view it, like private arbitration will eventually suck, and on the opposite you give me this, you particularly give me this narrative that corporations there ইয়ে আছে, publicity একটা ব্যাপার আছে, and employees can easily go and say like breach of trust হইছে, and ওটা তারা চায় না, এই কারণে আমাদের হবে না। I particularly find that a bit difficult to like buy into that particular idea. However, যখন Sourodip এসে আমাকে particularly বলে যে arbitrators in and of itself are professionals, so you can't at all like just say that they will be absolutely neutral and corporations এর থেকেও দূরে থাকবে and কোনো রকমের ইনফ্লুয়েন্স থাকবে না, কোনো কিছু থাকবে না, they will just work freely and independently for their client, which is basically the individual employees who are in dispute. এই জিনিসটা যখন বলে তখন I felt that the response that came from Rifayat was not adequate. So Rifayat did not deal with this particular idea or this particular nuance directly. Rather, she went and said that lawyers are essentially just they just know how to play with emotions and how to tactfully play with the citizen jury, so that like ultimately ora kono na kono bhabe they just find a way of like emotionally manipulating the jury and winning those particular cases. However, this sort of this sort of goes into like a head-on deadlock clash with how like arbitrators are like, they know how to like judge the weaknesses of judges and juries, like even in the worst case when they go up to the courts, like beyond like taking Nawed's argument that দেখো কোনো কিছু যদি না হয় সবকিছু বাদ গেল তারপরে যদি কোর্টে যায়, they know how to play with this particular thing, and that's particularly problematic. So when Rifayat like sort of characterizing her argument in that way, it sort of like makes a deadlock clash with what Sourodip said, and essentially does not yield into a proper mechanism of how like either arbitration will work or juries would work for the opening oppositions word. And I find that like particularly problematic, and which is why I think in my head I'm sort of like leading towards OG. However, যদি আমি আরেকটু বেশি চিন্তা করি, I might find reasons to give it to OO somewhat. আমি এখনো চিন্তা করে পাইতেছি না। However, why CO particularly is for, I think when there is like a lot of matter right in front of you, like which are really impact heavy, when you run this particular idea that it's important, so like you borrow a lot of the impact that came from you, came before you from the upper house, and sort of run the idea that how individuals and these particular disputed employees should at least have the choice to choose for arbitration. I felt that the impact generated from that particular argument was quite low in comparison, like even with opening opposition who went third. So which is why unfortunately, while those arguments were like really good, and I think like those arguments were really well analyzed as well, and there were good comparatives, I really felt that just like having a just like having low impacted contribution to the debate, unfortunately you guys at least in my initial rankings take fourth. Why first? There are a few reasons. I felt that the essential deadlock that was happening in the upper house, like no one was giving comparatives at all. I think like Adi's particular speech sort of brought broken it down, like in terms of like saying that what like wait, so how like there are going to be huge amount of pressure in order to ensure that disputed employees deserve justice and not corporations particularly. I think that's something that really needed a lot of opposition, particularly from CEO, which CEO did not really engage with. I think like sufficiently engage করে নাই, maybe এক দুইটা লাইন হয়তো কিছুটা বলার চেষ্টা করছে। However, CEO যেটা মনে করছে যে দেখো this particular argument was all about activist and social discourse driven entities and parties in the society supporting and empowering disputed employees, I felt that that particular framing was যেটা CEO ধরছে was not is not what the whole argument sort of like embodies. I think the argument is many comes in many folds. So প্রথমে হলো গিয়ে কোর্টের উপরে মানে এই এমপ্লয়ারদের মানে যারা কোর্ট এন্ড জুরি টুরি হ্যান্ডেন আছে এদের উপরে প্রচুর অ্যামাউন্ট অফ প্রেসার থাকে যেটা আরবিট্রেশনে থাকে না। Plus there are like empowering mechanisms as well, and our activists can also help. And since we're in an activist driven consumerism era, there is importance given to employee justice, and that particularly ensures in many ways that justice is served and arbitration does not do that. I also felt that the idea that so I also felt that the idea of like giving greater form greater form of agency, a particular nuance chilo argument, I think a jinishta is something that you also like someone had to like even with the POI someone had to take that down, because there was a good exclusive layer of extension to a lot of the things that opening government were trying to put forward. So they were opening government অনেক কিছুই বলতেছিল, but no one was talking from the perspective of the individual disputed employee. And I think like a particular analysis, a Vishal Borat analysis, actually like sort of like enables a lot of what OG was trying to say. So it made sense when CG comes up with this particular analysis. However, I felt that the idea, and this really needed like a lot of opposition, jeta ashe nai, how you in principle like you really need to create standards where people understand what to avoid and what not to avoid. The example of battery, like usually mare mardur kora pore society court e jawar pore যে bad publicity to run kore, that essentially shows that this motherfucker is someone you need to stay away from. And even in these industry standards and industry cultures, if there is someone who's committing discrepancies, or even like someone who's oppressing or sexually harassing their workers, people need to know about this, and like through their characterization, like in the kind of time now I'm not open to questions now, Shadman, in a while. So even in their characterizations, ওরা যখন বারে বারে এসে বলতেছে যে দেখো, it's very important for you to empower people, and along with it you give them justice. So justice is not the only measure. So which is why when they give me that particular principle যে দেখো এই particular কারণে তোমার কোর্ট কেসে গেলে এই জিনিসটা is very well done, and like মানুষ জানতে পারবে, you create precedents, you create standards, and how you stop like corporations cleverly mutating information and hiding stuff, and how you're going to stop that particular idea. I think that sort of like stood. So even in face of opposition, when they come and try to tell me that what, there are legal loopholes, and a legal loophole দিয়ে use করে অনেক রকমের information বের হবে না. However, যখন শ্রেয়ান এসে particularly আমাকে বলে যে দেখো in many cases there are in all these cases যেগুলো like that went before all of us, there's always some form of accountability that anyone has to take. And these forms of accountability, when there is like legal solutions available, you will obviously have a culture which will enhance justice more rather than enhance a culture of hiding information. So while your premise of the argument, when you come and tell me যে দেখো অনেক জায়গায় অনেক information লুকাবে, that particular premise, even though that's flawed, even if I want to accept it, I think Shreyan's particular analysis of how arbitration strengthens the corporation, and there are different ways of threatening like the employees and individuals, like ওই জিনিসটা plus how like there is public accountability and a lot of social recourse. These particular ideas, I think those were like a much stood much better than the other arguments. However, I felt that CEO really needed to respond to a lot of material which CEO sort of did not, and I think that's the initial idea that I have of the feedback. I'm sorry I was very haphazard. If you have like very brief 1 to 2 questions, I'm willing to answer that. I'm a cigarette কিনতে হবে, দোকান বন্ধ হয়ে যাবে.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So what kind of impacts were missing from the CO's constructed?
Yeah, so like while this debate was happening, I wanted to think about what exactly you could have done. I did not, because I really need to buy cigarettes. If you can give me like 5 to 10 minutes, I could come and give you a good case on this. I really feel that there should be
cigarette কে বেচে
আছে মোমবাতির অনেক কিছু পাওয়া যায় কথা হলো কি there are I'm quite sure there is like a lot more that can come from CO, particularly আমার কাছে মনে হয়েছে যে ওপেনিং অপোজিশনে কিছু কিছু মেটেরিয়াল আছে যেগুলো তারা ফুললি কভার করে নাই, এগুলো তারা টান দিতে পারতেন, টান দিলে তারা would be in a much more favorable position. I think একটু সময় দিলাম, এটা নিয়ে চিন্তা করতে পারবো। আমি সরি, আমি এটা নিয়ে চিন্তা করতে পারি না, তাড়াহুড়ায় ছিলাম। আর কি কোনো প্রশ্ন আছে?
যে কোশ্চেনই করে বলবা তোমার চাওয়া গেছে কিন্তু
না আমাকে তুই যদি নতুন মেটেরিয়ালের ব্যাপারে জিজ্ঞেস করিস আমি বলতে পারবো না, এছাড়া অন্য কিছু জিজ্ঞেস করলে আমি বলতে পারবো।
আচ্ছা, না আরেকটা জিনিস ছিল, তুমি বলতেছিলে যে corporations not revealing information is flawed. So what I think that the reason that's not flawed is because most of the employee information is protected. That means even if
here's the thing. So আমি এই জিনিসটা যে এটা যে প্রেমিসটা ফ্লড, এটা আমি খালি তোকে একটা ক্রিটিসিজম হিসেবে দিছি, এটা আমি ডিবেটে অ্যাকাউন্ট করিনি। However, in face of legal action, corporations are forced to give information about employees. There are some significant information. For instance, what are the personal information, like for instance Facebook যেগুলো শেয়ার করতে চায় না, যেটা লাগে ফেসবুক কনভারসেশনস, একজন মানুষ আরেকজন মানুষের সাথে কি বলতেছে, অর দি এনক্রিপ্টেড ডেটা যেটা ভাইবারে চলে, এগুলো শেয়ার করা যায় না। এগুলো ইউজুয়ালি লাইক there are rogue governments who ask for this. However, if we do look into this, whether or not these are the kind of information that essentially is going to decide whether there is an employee versus corporation dispute, whether or not these are going to be the information, probably not. And probably the kind of information that
does the individual have to be employee at all times?
Not particularly so, like
because if that's not the case, in an individual versus corporation debate, the information that you said Facebook cannot release are the things Facebook can release in an arbitration, because these won't be leaked in public. In that case, the premise doesn't seem that flawed.
আচ্ছা, cool. So তুই প্রথম কথা
Can I add something here?
না, একটু পরে। So like আমি শাদমানের কোশ্চেনটা অ্যানসার করে আমি দৌড়টা দিই, তারপর তোরা কথা বল। So শাদমান, so here's the thing. So প্রথম কথা হলো তুই যেরকম এখন যে নুয়ান্সটা আনছস, এই জিনিসটা তুই প্রথমে আনস নাই। There is a very good differentiation of what you just said and the kind of material that surfaced in the debate. However, like even if, and this is something that I'm just critiquing and not something that made you lost the debate, but even in these particular cases, just look at this. Arbitration, corporations have that particular edge of manipulating the information that they would think or that they would make available on the table, right? In terms of when it's a legal action, through courts and through lawyers and juries involved, they essentially ask you to like give whatever you have, and there is absolutely no filtration involved. So corporations arbitrationের সময় arbitrator এসে বলবে তোমার এই পার্টিকুলার ইনফরমেশনটা দাও, কর্পোরেশনের কাছে তখন ওই এবিলিটিটা থাকে আমি এগুলো দিব, ওগুলো আমি দিতে পারবো না, কারণ লিগ্যাল লুপহোল আমার আর ওই ডিসপিউটেড এমপ্লয়ির মধ্যে আছে। When it's a court, there is a court decision or a court warrant precedes these things. Essentially the reason why when a court says you give me this, they're bound to give this for when there is a court case involved, particularly because in many of these cases, court cases and court jaja bola hoy and all the information that are given out does not go into the public. When that is ensured, they essentially give out this information. So in many of the corporation versus individual cases, or in cases where the corporation had to give out information, there was regulations were involved to ensure that all these information would still be kept secret if there are secret information that the corporation does not want to give out, and then it was shared in the court. So now no information was left behind, right? So just as a very simple I'm just answering you. This did not really factor into the debate.
Okay.
আচ্ছা, does anyone have any other questions? তোর এক কাজ কর বাপ, তোর যদি প্রশ্ন থাকে তুই জাস্ট লিখে আমাকে পাঠাই দে, আমি নিচে সিগারেট কিনে নিয়ে আসি। I'm still gonna be logged in here if you want to write the questions here, sure. Okay, cool.
Cool.
Hackers finally turning off the stream.